So imagine this for a second. Your head suddenly feels too heavy to hold up. You can't look forward, you can't see where you're going. Well, that's the reality for people with a really mysterious condition called dropped head syndrome. And in this explainer, we're going to dive into what's behind it. Take a look at this. A person's head just falls forward, making it pretty much impossible to look ahead. And this isn't just a posture problem, it's a condition that completely changes every part of someone's life, from eating and breathing to just walking down the street. So, this brings up some huge questions, right? What on earth could cause such a specific and severe weakness? And maybe more importantly, what is the body trying to tell us when this happens? Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing you really need to get is that dropped head syndrome, or DHS, isn't a disease in and of itself. A better way to think of it is like a clue, a really, really obvious clue that points to a whole bunch of different underlying conditions. It's the start of a medical investigation, not the final answer. So what exactly are we talking about here? Well, basically, DHS is all about a severe weakness in the very muscles that are supposed to hold your head up straight, the neck extensors. When those muscles give out, gravity just takes over. And you wouldn't believe the list of potential suspects here. The problem could be coming from neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinsonism or motor neuron diseases. It could even be faulty signals between the nerves and the muscles, like you see in myasthenia gravis. But for our purposes today, we're going to zoom in on one of the major causes, myopathies, diseases that go after the muscles themselves.
And this is where the real detective work begins. If DHS is a symptom of a myopathy, how in the world do doctors figure out which one it is? The whole process is like putting together a fascinating high-stakes puzzle.
But this puzzle is incredibly hard to solve. Get this, a study of 107 patients with myopathic DHS found that doctors could only nail down a specific cause a little over half the time. That means for nearly half of all cases, a whopping 47%, the actual underlying myopathy was still a total mystery. So how do they crack the case? Doctors follow a really methodical process. It always starts with a deep dive into the patient's history and a thorough physical exam. Then comes the lab work and imaging. But a lot of the time, the clue that breaks the case wide open comes from that last step, taking a tiny piece of the muscle and looking at it under a microscope, a muscle biopsy.
And it turns out where you take that sample from is a huge deal. Research actually shows that if you take a biopsy from one specific neck muscle, the splenius capitis, you have the best shot at solving the case, a 67% success rate. It's a perfect example of how precision is everything in this investigation.
And when you get it under the microscope, the culprit can just pop right out. In this biopsy from a patient with what's called inflammatory myopathy, you can see these big purple clusters. That's not an infection. Those are the body's own immune cells, and they're mistakenly surrounding and attacking healthy muscle. It's a battle happening on a microscopic level, and the dropped head is the most visible casualty.
Now, for years, this is kind of where the trail went cold for a lot of patients. But a recent discovery has given doctors a powerful new clue, especially for that big group of inflammatory myopathies. And it's a surprisingly simple pattern that has totally changed how doctors approach this mystery. And here's the kicker. The most important clue isn't hiding in some complicated lab test or an expensive scan. It's the patient's age when the symptoms first started. And as you're about to see, that one little piece of information, it changes everything. So what researchers found was this really clear dividing line. They looked at a group of patients with this kind of myopathy and saw that basically everything, the specific diagnosis, the rate treatment, the likely outcome, all of it changes depending on one thing, whether the symptoms started at age 70 or younger or after age 70. So this single clue, age, effectively puts patients on two completely different paths. And understanding these two paths is absolutely critical for managing the condition and knowing what to expect. Okay, so let's look at that first path. If symptoms start at or before age 70, the diagnosis is often something like overlap myositis or dermatomyositis. And the good news here is that these conditions are way more likely to respond to the treatments we have. In fact, in the study, almost 1 in 5 patients in this group actually saw their head drop get better or even go away completely. But for people whose symptoms start after age 70, well, it's a very different story. The diagnosis here is overwhelmingly a condition called inclusion body myositis. We're talking nearly 3/4 of these cases.
And unfortunately, this type of myopathy generally doesn't respond to current treatments. In the study, not a single patient in this older group had their head drop resolved. I mean, this distinction is so powerful that the researchers themselves concluded it pretty bluntly. They said the age at first symptoms was an effective parameter to delineate two groups of patients. Just that one piece of information can guide the entire strategy from that point on.
So why does all this matter? Why go through all this detective work? Well, getting that specific diagnosis is about so much more than just putting a name to the problem. It's really about saving and improving lives.
Because DHS is often just the tip of the iceberg, it's a huge warning sign for other, less obvious problems. In one big study, a staggering 89% of patients with myopathic DHS also had abnormal lung function. Half of them had trouble swallowing, and over a third showed abnormal heart screenings.
So at the end of the day, solving the mystery of what's causing the dropped head is just everything. It lets doctors find the right treatment, it tells them to proactively screen for those dangerous breathing, swallowing, and heart issues, and it allows them to give patients and their families a clear, honest idea of the road ahead. It provides answers, and with answers, you can make a plan.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thought. The story of dropped head syndrome is this powerful reminder that a problem is rarely just a problem. It's a clue. So what if we started viewing every symptom we encounter, not as the end of the story, but as the beginning of an investigation?